I took a year off college. I was studying business and great program at UT, but I could not get excited about it. I didn't see how I was going to use it. It felt very narrowing. And I took a year off. I went and took just some oddball jobs. And one of them was going door to door. And one of my colleagues there, he went back to school and he looked at me and he's like, Jacek, you gotta come to this class, man. It's awesome. He was a huge stoner. I love the guy. And I went with him to the class. It was an animal ethics course, and the way the guy taught it was really captivating. He taught like closed circle, high interaction, emotional intelligence, and then the content was pretty cool too. He was teaching, animal ethics, which I was like, wow, it's something I never even thought about. It's just like a totally different concept. So when I decided to go back to school, I was like, okay, I'm going to study philosophy because philosophy is all about expanding and just seeing as much of the world and questioning it and questioning everything in a sense. So I really wanted to expand my view. And of course, that class came up, and I was like, all right, let's take it. It was like an honors class. I was not some honors student, but I like nudged my way in the class. And yeah, he showed, he was really smart. He did it in a lot of ways where, he showed his documentary called Earthlings, which shows the inside of factory farms. And when you see it, you'll never forget it. I mean, it's insane. It's like you see this mass processing of life. And it just reminded me of like my childhood dog who was, you know, innocent. And I mean, I don't know about innocent. He was, kind of a rascal too, but, very, very vulnerable, and then you see what we're doing to these animals and you're like, this is insane. Like this is so unethical. And it hurt my soul to see it. And I was like, I just want to change this shit. Like, that's what I want to do. Like I got really motivated, through the pain in a way. And, I became like this vegan activist guy. I would say I was never like too crazy. Like, I was always talking to people and trying to show them what I saw through that class. Um, and it wasn't just all emotion, actually. There was a big aspect where we watched another documentary called Cowspiracy, and it showed all the inefficiencies in, raising animals and fishing. If you think about it, it's an incredibly inefficient system and an environmentally destructive one. So then, like, the logic started lining up with the heart, and it was like, okay, not only is this wrong and it feels awful, but it's really inefficient. And like, not from the scientific sense, from the business sense, it's artificially propped up. So you have a real opportunity, and it rides the wave of, sustainability, which is obviously getting more and more and more important. So yeah, all of that kind of pushed me, and I became that animal rights guy, and I worked with PETA at the University of Texas, which, like, I always love the joke, but it like really limited my dating options. Like, I just like, Texas is just not what you want to be doing. Um, but we were pretty good. We actually worked with the dining hall system there, and we got, vegan meals into the major dining halls, which was a pretty big win, like at a big university. And that was like the first time I tasted, I think, besides like going to the gym or I don't know, just having fun, like working really hard at something. And there's nobody grading you, there's nobody watching you. It's just your thing. And so, yeah, man, it was great. It was a cool experience that kind of set me off on it. But I started realizing I would have a lot of these conversations and people would agree. They'll be like, you're right. Like, factory farming's messed up. Animals shouldn't suffer. We should save the environment. And they would still just eat the way they ate. And I went to a conference actually later. It was about a year and a half after that started. And, they talked about like, the best analogy was somebody made at the conference was like, if you're pole vaulting, like the pole vaulter is trying to get over this big hurdle, and that hurdle is becoming vegan, right? And so this is around 2016. I think you have all these people in the crowd cheering like, go vegan, do it for the animal, do it for the environment. But the runner still has to run, and they still have to get really high. It's a massive amount of effort. And then they just ask the question, like, how do you make it easier for them? Just lower the bar, right? And you lower the bar by giving people an option that makes it easy for them. And that hit me so hard, that I was like, all right, I gotta pivot my focus. I'm not gonna be like, proselytizing this. And I do think there's a time for that, and there's glad people are doing it. Um, but I realized what I wanted to do was go down this route of making it easier for people. And that was actually more exciting for me because I always kind of had this desire to start my own company. It was something that I was playing with for, 4 or 5 years by that point. I just never had found the thing that I was excited enough to do the work on. I just realized I'm not that kind of person. Like, I don't know, maybe I'm just lazy. I got to be really into it. And so, I was like, all right, I don't know shit about business. I went to go get an MBA in entrepreneurship. And that gave me some of the fundamentals. And after that, I helped to found an accelerator for alternative protein companies because starting a company was just too difficult. I didn't have the network yet. And when I found that accelerator with a group in Germany called ProVeg, I really got to be on that original team building it. I just learned a ton. I learned the industry. I learned the people, like learned a lot about, where the opportunities were, a lot about startups. And that was kind of the launching site for Current Foods. So all of it led up, and that was like a span of from 21, and I think the company was at 27 when I started working on it kind of part time. 20, or I was 26, and then at 27, we went full time on the company. I left that group right in the beginning of when was it? That was all the way back in January of 2020. So right before COVID hit. And man, we were like doing a fundraising run. We had actually some offers we turned down, and they were pretty good, but we were like, no, we can raise a ton of money. And COVID hit and we just got slammed. And we had to go, and like I couldn't pay rent for a couple months. But we got into Y Combinator. So pretty phenomenal accelerator that really, we got around some smart people and we were able to raise good capital, and that just kind of set it all off. But to your point, a lot of people didn't even notice us until we raised that seed round out of Y Combinator. Yeah. And it's to your point, it's like, oh, you're out of nowhere. And it's like, no. This was from the beginning, like in college, giving up the secure route of getting a, business degree or becoming a lawyer, because that's what philosophy students do, to, working construction and delivering food after getting an MBA because you don't want to settle for those other jobs, to, at 25, 26, making almost nothing and moving to Europe on an internship. Like, it's a lot of shit, especially when I think people are defining new things. And it took a lot of time and sacrifice. And not to say I didn't enjoy life in the meantime, but it was a lot.
Yeah, you gotta sometimes learn things the hard way in that process because there is no other way. Like, you just got to do it with brute force, and then you hope you learn from it in the process. You said something that I really relate to a second ago. You talked about you became aware of an issue and you kind of became an activist about it. You learned about it. You had something to say about it, but then you sort of transitioned out of like activism into, I don't know what the next phase is, doing something about itism. Mm-hmm. And I relate to that a lot. I think there's times with a lot of different topics where I've had, friends and colleagues and say, oh, we should get active about this, or essentially saying like, we should be activist about this. And I've always thought to myself, I don't think my job is to be an activist. I think my job is to listen to the activist and then do something about it. That's what I do. That's what I do. Right. And we need everybody, like everybody plays a role. Totally. And so there's a type of personality who's a great activist and raises awareness of other things, but we also have to have throughput on that. And there's people like, I would say probably like you and I, who are like, can we do something about it? I think we will, and let's go do it. And we need that player too, right?
Totally, man. Yeah, that's so important. I mean, it's to your point. You find the thing that you do, and you're good at it. You enjoy doing it. And that's your value add, right? And it's, from your point, it can be being an activist. It can be being, the catalyst for those people to get their voice out there. It can be, people like on our team are so different at our company. Some people are really organized. They're super functional and like incredible operators. Some people are more creative. Like some people talk, and all of them serve their purpose. And I think that the hard part is sometimes we get caught up in doing things a certain way, and it can be hard to let go of that and just being like, okay, that had its time and place, and here's my other thing. And I think I think my dad told me that was really, really powerful, and it's super basic, but it's like, what's really exciting for you? Like, what do you feel that's like, this gets me pumped up? Because when I was walking away from kind of, the activist perspective, it was kind of hard for me. I was like, fuck, I'm like giving up on these things and like I'm, just going to do this. But then I realized like I got to be pumped up about it. And if I'm not pumped about it, like it's going to be pretty hard to be effective. I
Yep.
think that's pretty true. It gets like
100%.
you got to get excited by it because that fuels the thing, right? And usually we
Yeah.
get pretty excited about what my other friend said was really smart. It's like put your efforts in where it feels like you're cheating, which kind of like face value, you're like, what the fuck? But where it feels like you're getting exponential returns, like way more returns than for the energy you put in, right? And I was like, man, that's super smart. Like, what are the things that I'm doing? And then you're rolling with it. You're like, holy crap, this is working.
Yeah.
Whatever this is working.
Yeah. The way I've said it is if you're doing it at 1 a.m. at night and you stop and think about what you're doing and you're like, oh, this is fun, I'm gonna keep going, like you found a good spot. But if you're like, oh, this is such a grind, I can't wait to not do this, like you're gonna have to work your way out of that somehow. But
yeah, yeah, it's tough. And part of this, like I also realize sometimes sometimes you're not going to like what you do too. Like it's not always going to be enjoyable.
yeah.
And that's tricky, right? Like sometimes there's gonna be parts that just suck. And ideally we outsource that or hand that over to somebody else and focus on,
Well, I think you got to be willing to go into it knowing that's the case. I had some great advice before I started Native, and that was, hey, they a person said, here's my definition of an entrepreneur. An entrepreneur is the person who's willing to do all the dirty work, because the people you hire can't hire them to do the dirty work. They want to do a nice job. They want a nice job. So that means you have to do all the in-between things, all the dirty work that you can't get someone to do. And if you're successful, eventually you can start delegating that stuff. But if you go into it thinking you're going to have like the best part and you're going to hire out the dirty stuff, it's not going to work. You're going to be disillusioned and really upset that it doesn't go that way.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
That really helped me, because I was like, yeah, bring it on. Give me the dirty work. That's what I'm signing up for.
Yeah. Yeah, because then you're just you're able to take it as it comes. Oh, it's interesting.
So
Yeah.
I'm one of the things about what you guys do that I think I'm very fascinated by is just, you talked about the inefficiency of the way the food system kind of works. Like there's crazy amounts of inputs to get these small outputs, right? Like how many units of grain and this and that to get like 1 unit of meat, right? It's pretty wild.
Yeah.
The more you're aware of it, and the average consumer has no clue, right? But more and more we're starting to wake up to the realities of this. But for a lot of plant-based food, far more efficient, which I think is super interesting, far more sustainable. It's a better way to consume food, to create food, that type of thing. Can you talk a little bit about like how you've approached that, and where you would say you are today, but what maybe you can envision getting to, and that type of thing? And then just a side note, man, I love tuna and salmon. I'm a big sushi, big poke guy. Like I see your guys' photos, I'm like, there's no way. Like how are they doing this? This looks so delicious,
Cool, man. Yeah, I mean, we've been working on those images for a while, and it's gonna get better for sure. I love that question. I love that question because it's the core of why I think this is inevitable. Like you can read the book, The Expanse, the series. It's like I just started reading. I'm like, this is sci-fi novel is incredible, and they are all eating like plant-based fermented foods. Like that's what people are going to eat in space. Like we won't be growing animals. But yeah, look, I mean, fundamentally, you have this, underlying thing like feed conversion ratio, right? And it's just, and what's interesting, maybe I won't take it from such a broad swath. I'll stick it for seafood for now. But if you look at the feed conversion ratio of, for example, chickens, it's like, I think it's somewhere around like 2 to 1. Pigs are 3 to 1. I think the latest with cows was like 6 to 1, 8 to 1. So, you're doing 8 pounds of corn to get 1 pound of meat out. And then for, bluefin tuna, it's like 26 to 1, because bluefin tuna, or just tuna, actually, all the tuna that we farm, are apex predators. So they're like way at the top of the food chain. They're super active. They have like, a lot of the hemoglobin. So they're red blood fish where they, accelerate through the water really rapidly. So they consume tons of energy. And what I think that's pretty interesting is, tuna, you can't really farm them. And you can't farm them because A, they're really difficult to breed, but B, and that's the biggest reason, we have to catch them from the wild and then put them into pens. So it doesn't even allow the wild population to recover. But then even when you catch them, a lot of them will die in the pens. They're very active, and the feed conversion ratio is so inefficient. I mean, 26 to 1, that, it doesn't really solve this fundamental challenge that you have a low population, and low supply, which creates high price. And this is kind of what drove us to focus on raw tuna as our first product, because we're like, oh shit, here's somewhere where we can come into the market and be price competitive. And the reality is, like, almost all alternative proteins cannot do this yet. They are coming at a premium, and unless your product is better than the animal, the average consumer will not buy it. The average consumer will be like, I'm not going to pay more for a product that's mediocre. And I probably won't even pay more for a product that's like the same, maybe because I care about the environment. That's a much smaller part of the market. So the way we address that is we targeted raw tuna, and we targeted smoked salmon. And smoked salmon is actually really expensive, more so for the operational complexity. You have to smoke the product, you have to slice the product. That process is actually pretty labor intensive. And so we're in the privileged position that we've been able to launch and be price competitive to the animal. So like if you go to a place and you see our smoked salmon, like you'll see that we're the same price. We're cheaper than some and we're more expensive than others, but we're like middle of the line smoked salmon price. And that's the same with most of our raw tuna on the food service side of the market. So, and the fundamental reason why, and this is at pilot scale. So when we get actual scale, we will undercut the cost significantly. Like we will be so much cheaper than those animal products, which is great because we not only expand the market size, but we'll be able to, just take those customers. And the fundamental reason, right? It's based on plants. You don't have you can look in, like if we look into the, tuna fishing industry, it's wild. They'll send out these, especially like the high end fresh stuff, they'll send out like massive boats that will have like, sub-zero freezers on them. And they'll go out and have these huge long lines enough to wrap the earth like 200 something times, if not more, in total. And they're catching all these tuna. They have to, chop them, freeze them, hold them on the boats, take those boats with like support boats, bring it back to the dock, cut it, freeze it, fly it. I mean, it's insane. And the reason for sure that it's really unsustainable is the heavy subsidy that goes into it. So this is an industry that's completely propped up by government subsidy. And that's for most industrial fishing. That's for definitely, like land-based animals. So when you would pull away these subsidies, these products would actually be practically unaffordable to the public. So you already have all of these issues there. So now the question is all about, can you make a product that tastes good enough and is affordable enough? And people are like, oh, well, the plant-based industry is having such a hard time. It's like, it's not going anywhere. And yeah, it's going to have a hard time because you're facing insane subsidies. And it takes quite a bit of time and money to make good food products. I mean, there's no way around that. I mean, this is pretty complex stuff. And it's not like a computer where, you can put all the technology you want into it. And this is an everyday commodity that should be healthy. So anyways,
I have to say your entry point with this is so smart. I'm a little surprised. I know this space is competitive, but I'm a little surprised it's not more competitive because it just makes so much sense. I mean, the strategy you're talking about, I assume others are pursuing different angles because of the volume that's there maybe, and they just want to be a first mover there. But it makes so much sense. What I got to ask, what was it like whenever you saw the product on the shelf for the first time?
Um, Yeah, I mean, it was cool. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I don't feel like I had that reaction. I could tell the team was all watching me and it was cool. Don't get me wrong. I was like, this is great, guys. But I was kind of just like, all right, let's keep going. Like to me, this is something I'm trying to work on actually is to really celebrate. I think it's
Yeah,
really smart and it's something I'm not that good at. And I'm realizing that's actually a weakness. Like a part of me is like, oh, you're cool, man. Like you just keep working and look at you, you just get the job done. But you realize like actually you need that and the people around you need that. And it's good for what you're doing to celebrate. And it's not mutually exclusive to keep working hard. In fact, it reinforces your capability to work hard because it lifts the morale. So, long story short, I wasn't as excited as I think some people were expecting. And I'm working on it. I'm working on, really seeing like, hey, this is awesome. And we're doing things. I think one of my challenges is that, I get driven by sometimes it's like, it's overwhelming. Like you see what we're doing to our world and you see it feels like it's moving at like a snail's pace. You're like, why are we not already replacing this on such mass? And I think that part of me is good because it drives me, but it's also a double-edged sword. Like it can demoralize me. And I think that's a big lesson I'm learning is patience and celebration and keep driving. Those things will actually help get the job done better. And I got to get rid of that narrative that, my coach helped me realize is that you should always be working. It's like, that's actually not a good narrative. A narrative is actually kind of destructive.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's a maturing process to learn those lessons. Though it sounds like you're learning it faster than some. I had the same thing, I will tell you, and it took me much longer than and probably you to figure that stuff out. It was many years before I started realizing like, oh, if I'm not going to celebrate this, then what's the point? Like I need to take a minute and celebrate this because there's certain little milestones that only come along every so often. And if you're not going to celebrate it because you're already on the next 5 years, like what's
Yeah.
the point,
Yeah.
And people on your team, there's a lot of benefits to working with a stoic, but
Yeah.
every once in a while you're like, come on, man, smile and celebrate.
That's funny you brought that up because that's literally what I was about to do. And so this is I'm really into stoicism, and this is a
Yep.
daily stoic thing, memento mori, or this one, shit, I wanted to show you the other one. It's amor fati. And amor fati means love your fate. It doesn't mean just bear with it. It means like fucking love it. Like this is your life. To your point, that milestone will only come once. And I thought that was so powerful is like it's actually the most enjoyable way to live life, but it's the most logical way to live life because in loving it, like we revitalize ourselves. And it's a stoic virtue, which is so cool. It's like these are the guys who are always talking about this stuff. And it's just it's like it's a much more enjoyable way to live. And I think when we remind ourselves that like this will never happen again, right? Like Justin and Jacek on this on the podcast talking and like it will never there will never be, maybe we do it again, but like there'll never be this one. This was the only one ever for all people of all time. And it's like kind of radical and every moment in life is that way. Um yeah,
If you can make it a game for yourself, that's kind of some advice that I didn't hear I read it somewhere and I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense and I need that. Is try to make these things, especially the things that feel like they could be stressful and you could get yourself psyched up, like make it a game for yourself. It's not high stakes. It's actually not high stakes at all. Like just make it a game, find a way to make it interesting, play that game. And when you're done, like, hey, it's just a game, and you can stay light, you can stay loose. I think you play at a higher level. So I'm not great at that, which is why I always think about it because I have to remind myself, like, hey, just make this thing a game. It's really helped me a lot. And if I see somebody who's wound a little tight, I'll always try to share that with them a little bit of like, hey, just loosen up. You'll play better if you play a little lighter here.
And I'm curious, like, how do you kind of do that? Do you have like a reminder on your phone? Do you have any systems, or is it just more of a philosophical thing that you've kind of been digesting?
I'm looking at a sign right here on my wall that says that. So that's one thing I do.
Yeah,
My
it's
kids
awesome.
like to make fun of me. They're like, Dad, you should be you're such a motivational speaker. I'm giving little pep talks here and there, and it's an eye roll from them at this age, but I'm hoping some
Yeah.
of it sinks in at
They're
some
gonna
point.
love it. They're gonna love it. My dad did this crap. Like he would always tell these stories, and I still remember them. I
Yeah.
still remember he would tell stories and like he would repeat them, and I even knew them. Like he said them 6 or 7 times, and I just always just would remember them. Like, and
Yeah.
I, and it's awesome. I'm like, I'm so grateful for my father. I'm like,
It's
thanks
good
for,
stuff. It's these little one-liners here and there, and if it's repeated to you enough, you remember it. There's basically two that I grew up hearing, and it was said to me so much that I can't not think about it. And I think I almost wonder like what I would have done had I not heard those two on repeat so much. I think I would have been a different person.
yeah. I'm actually curious. Like,
One of them is a very Midwestern one, which is, um, you're no better than any other person and they're no better than you, right? That's one. And that a lot of people grow up hearing that one. And so I think that influences the way you are around people. No one's beneath you. And so you interact with them just like they're your equal because they are.
yeah,
But also, when you walk into a really intimidating situation and you feel like you got a big presentation, big opportunity, you're like, I'm not intimidated by this. Like, you and I are equals here. We're the same.
yeah.
And so I think it makes you a little bit more confident in those situations because you're not as intimidated. We're just people, right? So that's one. The other one, both of these are from my grandmother, by the way.
Oh,
Um,
really?
yeah.
That's cool.
The other one was it was basically just real simple. It's like if you set your mind to something, like you can do it. Like there's nothing you can't do. Like, but you have to put your mind to it. And so
Mm,
I really grew up believing like anything's possible, but I
yeah,
just have to decide what I want to commit myself to. So I
yeah,
think both of those were like super helpful. I mean, the idea that like anything you want to do, if you're willing to put in the work, you can do it. Not everybody grows up with that sort of conviction that they can,
yeah,
but you also have to be ready to put in the work for it. It's not going to come easy.
yeah. That's really those are good. I really like that first one too, to the second point. Like I think we all kind of hear like you should respect other people. And well maybe we don't. Maybe we don't. But the counterintuitive one too is like, well, other people, like we're all on the same level, and um it's a beautiful way to look at the world. It actually sounds kind of existentialist in a way. It's like we're all just here, and we can do whatever we want in this short lifetime that we have. It's
Yeah.
very
One of
powerful.
the one of the biggest meetings I went to my first year in the industry,
Mhm.
uh, I was getting ready to go to it, and the guy I was working for, he goes, "Hey man, don't be intimidated in this room." He goes, "You're gonna be like younger than everybody by 20 years." He's
Mhm.
like, "Believe me, you belong to be there. You'll be fine." And
Yeah.
then he goes, "By the way," he goes, "I didn't learn that until I went to a big meeting when I was about your age, and the CEO of this big company, we're all ordered salads in at this big executive table, and everybody's getting their salads." And he goes, "I watched this really successful, intimidating CEO grab mayonnaise and put mayonnaise all over his salad, and then try to figure out why his salad didn't taste good when he's eating this like mayonnaise covered salad." He goes, "That was the day I realized like we're all idiots in some level. Like I'm fine. I'm doing just all right." And so I always had this image when I go into these big board meetings when I was in my 20s of, yeah, any of you guys could put mayonnaise on your salad at any moment right now. So I'm fine.
That's pretty gross.
Yeah.
I wonder if he knows now. He's like, oh man, I've been hearing about this everywhere.
I'm that guy. Yeah. Hey, speaking of ingredients, how long did it take? How many different recipes and iterations did you have to go through to
Mhm.
get to raw tuna that, I mean, I haven't tasted it, but I'm
Yeah.
looking at the photos. I'm like, this
Yeah.
is amazing. How did you guys do it? And I've seen some of your ingredient lists, and I'm sitting there trying to think like,
Hmm.
how does that, how does that go together? Like,
Yeah.
can you
Yeah.
talk
I
about that a
mean,
little bit?
sure. I mean, it's been, I think now it's probably over 10,000 iterations.
10,000.
It's food science, man. Like it's like a
Yeah.
whole thing, and I think from the high level, I grasp it, but from the definitive, it's not my wheelhouse. But so it's a ton of trial and error, just a ton of trial and error. And you get like incremental improvements. I was actually talking to this, who's our first investor. I was just talking with him today, and it's really cool because you get these. points where you're like, oh, the product's good. Like, I just don't think it's going to get better. And then it gets better. And then it gets better and keeps getting better. And it's so cool because there's so much room to optimize food. Like animals are maxed out. They're not going to get any better. But plants and like all the other stuff, tons of stuff that's going to, keep making it tastier and better and healthier.
I
Yeah.
completely agree, by the way. And I think that it's such an underrated um, note about plant-based food and some of the kind of alternative foods that are coming out right now. It reminds me of like, you remember the first version of the iPhone and how a lot of the apps were like, hey, it's like that old fashioned thing you did. And here's an interface that you're familiar with. And then like 5 versions later, like it doesn't resemble that at all because we forgot what that old device even was. Like, I think that's where we're at with plant-based food is like, this tastes just like this. And then in however many years, it'll be like, actually, we can make it taste better. And we've got, and people prefer this type of thing. And like, oh, but what is that? Like, well, it's an evolution of this. And maybe that's not, maybe people aren't in the headspace to appreciate that or even want to yet. But I think that's coming. Absolutely.
Totally. Yeah. Food's interesting because it's like when you say, if we just called it, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, like, maybe you could create some beautiful marketing name around it, but people with food tend to be a little less adventurous. Like they kind of like to know what they're eating and have a natural. So I think that's the whole movement around doing like plant-based tuna instead of plant-based, red, meaty thing. Like it's interesting. It's like there's the marketing around it is a whole conundrum, and it's fascinating, and it will improve. On the ingredient side, we're kind of it's just water, protein, and fat. And so we do water from just purified water. Protein is coming from peas. The latest iterations have pea, hemp, and rice. So complete amino acid profile, same amount of protein. The fat comes from sunflower and algae gives it the fishy taste. So that's where you actually get like a fishy taste, which we have to navigate right because we've done algae oil in the past where it's like too fishy and people are like, this is too fishy. I'm like, well, it's fish. And they're like, no, too fishy. So we have to turn down the fish taste, which is kind of ironic. You're fishier than fish. And then the colors from tomato. So those are kind of like fundamental ingredients. And then you have, things that also help with structure, and that's like bamboo fiber, konjac, algae, like these things can help with the water retention, the structure. It's pretty interesting. And the product's just going to keep getting better. It's like, that's what I get really excited about. It's like sky's the limit right now.
Yeah, that's cool. The very first impression, I'll tell you what I thought, and I'm curious. I'm sure you hear all kinds of crazy reactions from people, but I've had some heirloom tomatoes that were so delicious. I'm like, this is like as good as some seafood I've had. And so when I saw it, I was like, well, I see that tomatoes are on the ingredients list. Like I thought, maybe it's very tomato. Like that's a big part of it. It sounds like it's not as big as I originally thought, but that's my uninformed snap judgment. And having had an experience just with like a tomato tasting so good, like I was like, oh, I would totally be into this. I'd totally give this a try. I would have no reservations whatsoever about trying that. What kind of reactions do you hear from people? Like, I'm sure you've been in front of people whenever they've had it for the first time. Like, what's the spectrum of reactions that you're getting from people?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. It's a lot about presentation. So if we put it like, there's times I don't even, we'll do taste tests and I just don't tell people. I'm just like, hey, you want some sushi, right? Which is sushi can have anything, and they see it and they're like, oh, cool. They eat it and they're like, this is really good. And like, yeah, it's plant-based. And they're like, wait, what the fuck? And they don't even know. So that's like the coolest part is like, if you don't even prompt people, they don't even know. They just think it's regular raw tuna and smoked salmon. And this has happened across the board so many times now. So I'm convinced, when the marketing's right, then you have the opposite spectrum. If you say, hey, here's vegan fish, like people will get kind of like skeptical and they start like trying to find things that are wrong with it. And, it's a really poor way to market it. I think you got something in the middle where it's like you have plant-based fish or you have current salmon or current tuna, right? Like, and then we get the branding in there, and that's, identifying that something's, a little different. So it's an interesting marketing game, but yeah, it really varies. Like you look, if you eat it side by side, you're still going to be able to tell a difference. I mean, by no means have we like completely mimicked it. Um, but it's a good product. And when you put it in things like you can't really even tell the difference anymore when you prepare it. So, it really ranges. And sometimes we hear like totally wacky shit where people are like, they really want something specific. Like I know we've been doing, tastings all across, and like some people are like really want fishy taste, like way more fishy taste. And they're like, I don't think so, man. Like I think most people actually do not like that fishy taste. And some people just want like no fishy taste. And it's some people want a certain color, they want it to be like like a deeper hue or a lighter hue. And so everybody has kind of an opinion in a way. The trick is like how do you just take the median and uh,
Hmm.
apply it to the best product improvement. And it's a fun dance to go around because you're like, man, maybe I'll just maybe point just create something totally crazy like a purple super soy sauce umami thing, and they would just be like, this is delicious, I don't know what it is. But most people just get too weirded out. It's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
We're not there yet. We got to wrap our heads around some other things first, I think, probably.
yeah,
What's been
yeah.
the most rewarding aspect of this so far for you?
I mean, there's a ton of self growth. Like I've grown a lot as a person, and that's anything from learning how to work better with people, learning how to work better with myself, how to optimize myself from a mental standpoint, from a physical standpoint. Um, communicate better, be more organized, all of that kind of stuff is, it's a huge thing of self-improvement, which is really cool because that carries into every other area of my life. Um, and then there's like, more tangible things about, specifically this, and that's like creating a great product. I mean, I think in the end, that's what drew us to this idea. And your comment earlier around why isn't there more people doing is like most people go after burgers or nuggets or things. It's there's some companies who really led the way and they innovated there, and a lot of other companies who are kind of just taking an approach where they just take the same process and they brand it in a new way, and that's really hard to do with what we're doing because nobody's really done that well yet, and that's what drew me to it. I was like, this is a good challenge. Like, how do you make a good raw fish? Like, how do you make a good smoked salmon? And it's really pushed us to kind of like innovate and really work on product dev. So I think having a great product that's differentiated, I think that's probably one of the most exciting things. And when you see people eat it and you see that moment where they would eat it, if you subbed out our stuff with like all grocery, our tuna with all the grocery store tuna stuff right on the market, we would totally, it would be like a knockout as long as it was marketed in an appropriate way. um and so that's like, I would say that's the most rewarding is creating a phenomenal product and seeing the customer's reaction to it, because in the end, that is, that's the first principles of the company. But raising a good amount of money is always nice, or like bringing on a good team member, like that's always pumps you up too. And that's those are other areas that you're like, hell yeah, the vision's coming together. You're getting more of an arsenal for the mission. Um,
That's
yeah, there's
cool. In the near term, do you think you'll stay in seafood and kind of expand in that portfolio, or do you see yourself adventuring further out, or is it too soon to say, or is that too secretive to say?
I mean, I think we're gonna stay on seafood right now. I think that's pretty fair. Like we really wanna win that market and make sure that the products perform well. Um, and we wanna, instead of like going to like a tons of SKU approach, just make really good SKUs. Which is not to say we're not gonna do more. Of course, we're gonna do more. So seafood for now. I think we could get into like different formats. We'll probably stay away from like breaded things. Well, who knows? Like I don't know. Maybe we will get in there. Maybe we see that like the opportunity's big enough. But for now, raw tuna, smoked salmon. There's a few other SKUs we kind of have that we're playing with in the similar area, and those are again the high price point items. You know, um, those products I think are the first place to win. And it's kind of taking like a Tesla approach, right? Like they
Yeah,
started with
totally.
a Roadster, and then they went to a Model S, and then eventually it's like the Model 3, Model Y, kind of more hot, like mid market, mass market. And that's the same way we want to approach things. Um, so
Yeah, I think it's very sharp, very, very smart approach. And again, I'm almost surprised other people haven't done it. I assume, like I said, I assume that they're going after the other stuff because of the volume and like total.
TAM, exactly. There's like a whole TAM
They got that TAM.
market.
I'm not a TAM fan.
I think
I
it's really
think
overrated too.
how can you win your Psalm? Like that's to me what that's the name of the game.
Yeah, and that's Y Combinator. They had like a famous saying. I think it's I'm pretty sure Paul Graham. It's it's do things that don't scale, right? Like find that core, do it really well, and then expand outward. Don't try to like do it the other way. But it is what it is.
Yeah. Well, that leaves opportunity for other people who have the better
Yeah,
approach, I think,
exactly.
Yeah, it's just so alluring to go after that big prize and never
Yeah.
really win anything. But that's how a lot of the world functions. So
Yeah, and we almost fell in that trap too. I remember there was like some investors who were like, "Oh, you need a bigger market size, and you should be going after like this." And then I was like, "That is no, like that's I'm sorry, like it's just a bad idea. Like that will, if that ever comes, that will come in its time. It's like these products in themselves are enough to create $100 million business if you execute properly. Like you'll get to your 100 million revenue mark. Like not getting distracted by the noise. Especially the way that things were going, like, before this economic time. Like everybody was just like, oh, grab the biggest shit ever. And it was kind of a little out of whack.